a little trip I took with my grandma when she turned 92, and I didn't know what to get her. My brother suggested that I take her on a trip, and I said, I couldn't afford that. I'd just been living at home the year before, and he was like, well, you could try and get her to pay for it. And I thought, well, that sounds immoral. Like, I'm offering her a trip, but deep down, and this is kind of pathetic to admit, but deep down I thought, it's a great idea because I will offer her this trip, and she's 92. She'll probably say, wow, that's such a thoughtful gift, but no, I don't really want to go on a trip, but that's the gift, so I wouldn't have to kind of give anything at that point. And to my kind of shock, she said, wow, that's great. I'm really looking forward to it. Where are we going? And I hadn't decided at that point. I had no idea. And as you get older, you start to kind of get to know yourself better. And at that stage, I was starting to realize that I'm not a very fun person. Just like one of the worst people to plan a trip, I think, would be me. And so over the course of a few weeks, as I was trying to decide what to do and, overthinking things, and in the end, I just offered her this 5-day trip to pick her up and bring her a couple hours to my apartment. And we were going to spend 5 days there. And again, I thought she might say, actually, you know what, on second thought, I'm good. But she accepted this trip, and she happily accepted it, and she embraced it. And it put me at ease right away to kind of enjoy this trip and enjoy the fact that I had not put any expectations on these days. I didn't plan activities, so it was just the two of us sitting around having meals, chatting, and just kind of being together, which I'd never done with her before. I'd only ever seen her in the context of family gatherings, and so again, like with my first book, it's started to emerge a narrative, and it became a story about thinking about my grandma and thinking about the way she lives, and in a way that to me I truly admired, even at her age. That she had a certain kind of intelligence that I think is much harder to appreciate and value, that we sort of in our culture value certain types of intelligence, and I think hers was a type that we don't value, and that became evident on these 5 days. And so I wrote a book about that was unexpected to me, and again I wrote it in the way that to me felt sort of like a novel. And after doing those 2 books, and they were more kind of humorous, but using the kind of context of memoir where you're given the story, it's nonfiction, so I didn't have to make anything up. It's almost like using guardrails. You still have to write the story, and it still has to have elements of a book that's going to be readable, that people will enjoy, but because you're not inventing anything, it's much easier. For me, it was anyway. And so after writing those 2, I now felt finally comfortable to try writing a novel, try making it up. And so I did that with my first novel. Finally, I felt now comfortable to try it. And I think with that book too, I remember telling a couple people, including my agent, and she was very encouraging of me. I'd written these 2 memoirs that were, again, kind of like humorous and gentle, a bit melancholic, but and this novel that I was proposing to her was completely different in tone. It was going to be more unsettling, more philosophical, more internal. And I was kind of expecting she might say, why don't you write one more like gentle, funny memoir or something, and she didn't. She said, no, this sounds really interesting. It sounds weird and different, but she said, I can see that you're really excited by this. And I'm so glad she did that, because I think anyone here who writes knows that if you get some kind of encouragement early with something, it sometimes can just keep you going. And the opposite is true too. If you feel self-conscious or a rejection on something, it's very easy to kind of shut it down sometimes when maybe it shouldn't be shut down. And so because of that early encouragement, I decided to do it, and I really felt like I wanted to do it in a way that was true to me. And I didn't know if I would be able to publish it, because it was a very philosophical story, and a lot of it took place in a car between 2 people talking or thinking. And so again, it does not sound like the type of thing that most publishers are like asking for. But it was, for me, exciting. It felt really interesting, and the ideas to me felt personal, and they felt both, again, unsettling in one way and interesting to explore in the other, in the context of fiction, which to me is you can really do anything you want in fiction. And this, I think, is related to then when the work started to get adapted and when I started to move into adapting work is that in fiction, in the realm of the novel, the only thing that's sort of limiting is your imagination. That's really it. You could write, a 3,000 page novel. I don't recommend it, and publishers probably wouldn't like it, but you could if it's warranted. If the story warrants it, I would certainly pick up a book like that and read it if I liked it. You can also write a novel that's 80 pages, if that's what is called for, if that's what you feel like this story is asking for. Whereas in film, that's not true. It's very limiting. You have a certain amount of space for the screenplay. You have to think about budget. Is this possible? How expensive is it going to be? So for me, the idea of trying things in a novel is very freeing and very exciting, because really anything can happen. If you can imagine it, you can do it. And so that was how I felt with my first novel. And when there was the initial interest in film adaptation, I really was, sincerely surprised. I never expected any. In the same way I was surprised because the majority of publishers that my agent had sent it to rejected the novel. We only got one offer, one Canadian offer, and then when we submitted it to the American publishers, it was the same. We had two offers basically. One of them said, "We really like it, but we need you to change the end." And I thought, I don't know. That doesn't sound like you really like it. It's sort of like someone saying, "Oh, you look great, but I wish you had a different face." Like it's that's sort of everything, So that offer didn't even feel sincere. The other offer was sincere and was the only true offer. And so, again, to me, I just felt, coming from Canada, I felt this was amazing. My whole hope was in those years, for probably 8 to 10 years as I was working on those early books, was to publish a novel and to get a publisher to do that. So I wasn't thinking about, I was working a variety of jobs and I wasn't thinking about in advance or doing this professionally. It was very just exciting for me to think about a publisher publishing my book, and someone who understood what I was trying to do. And so the idea of adapting it into film was even farther afield. That never crossed my mind, and I was a huge film fan. I used to volunteer at a little cinema where I live in Kingston. And I remember, because the agent who was kind of in charge of sending it around to producers, there was, to my surprise, a few producers who were initially expressing interest in On Being of Endings. And I was kind of dubious because, again, it doesn't scream cinematic, And I remember talking to, again, a few who I could almost tell hadn't even necessarily read the book. And it seemed like the cliche of the Hollywood producers who are just kind of throwing these things out. And at that point, I didn't realize that a lot of times on a book will get optioned, and really they just might grab it because they want to have the rights for a bit, but they're not that serious about making it. And so again, it sort of, for me, was kind of a turnoff. And then a few weeks into that process, the agent had emailed me kind of out of the blue and said, "Would you have time next week to talk to Charlie Kaufman, because he's interested in talking to you?" And I was like, wow, I had been a huge fan of his film's adaptation, Eternal Sunshine, and I remember it well because I did look down. I have one of those calendars on my desk, and I looked down, and the week was literally blank. Like, I didn't have one appointment in the whole thing, and I was like, yeah, I can probably talk to Charlie at some point. Like, tell him yes, I will. And so she did, and he called me. And unlike the other ones with the producers, where there were like some agents on the phone and he just called me on his own, and it was just he and I on the phone. And I remember it so well because we talked for about an hour, and we didn't know each other at all, but I knew his work. But his whole demeanor was so different from those producers. He was very sincere. He was genuine. I could tell he was a true artist. He was sort of what I had envisioned him to be like. He was smart, but also humble, and he just expressed this interest in the story that I'd written. And from that point on, I knew that if anybody was going to adapt this, it had to be him. And I wouldn't have wanted to do it with anybody else. And it was a long process. It was sort of a few years before it actually even happened. But he and I kind of stayed in touch over that time. And a lot of time, it was this, strange thing, because for a long time, I didn't know in those years, like, you feel really close to something exciting happening, and it may never happen. And I was always kind of in this limbo and trying to work on new stuff. And so I remember in that time when kind of Netflix emerged, and they were then finally said, yes, we're going to make this, and he's going to direct it. And it was so nice for me, because he was so welcoming to me, I think, as a writer and as someone who had no experience in film, that he allowed me to be part of this process. And you know, beforehand talking to me about it, and then coming down to the set when they were filming, and I really got to see, I think, Charlie's approach to both adapting work but also directing a film, and the way he treated people, and the way he treated actors, and the way everybody who was there not because they were making a lot of money, but because they loved what he was doing, they loved his vision, and they trusted him in this sort of, again, this idea of collaborating in some sort of art form, this idea of collaborating, and the sort of excitement that and the satisfaction that comes from collaboration, and the heart of collaboration with people like that, who are like-minded, and who seem to be following the excitement of an idea, not anything else. And he was certainly like that. And to me, I'm so grateful, because that has shaped what I look for now as I go forward. And so when I progressed to Foe and started working on that film based on my novel, I knew the type of people I wanted to work with, and I knew how I wanted to do it, and it was all because of that first experience. And it followed suit. It was with a director named Garth Davis, who was an Australian director, but in a similar way, he was so generous with me, and getting to work with actors, and you know, talking to actors before a film is shot, and they're asking you questions. It's like a writer's dream. No one else cares about like the backstory of the characters you've came up with, but I could talk about them for hours. And finally, these actors like, tell me more about this character. I'm like, absolutely. How long do you have? You know, I could tell you for hours about this character. And so you're sort of, I have this excitement I feel like I'm just the writer on a film. There's so many other people involved, and when they match your excitement, it feels so unlike anything else, I think. And you can't really get that in novel writing. That's the one difference, I think, with novel writing. As much as I love it, and as I said, the idea that it's sort of anything is possible, it's really a solitary. It's very much you're in your head for a long time, years. And with film, right away, it's collaborative. You're invited into this collaboration with other artists. And there are musicians involved, there are actors, there are people who light the film, there are people whose expertise is the sound. I got to sit in on the sound design in Australia for Foe for a week, and it was one of the most interesting experiences of my life to watch the sound designers work, and how each frame and scene they're stopping to try and match the sound just right, and to hear the composers, you know, and hear them take the material that I've written and to write music based on that, to me, again, is a thrill and a privilege, it feels like, to have that happen. And all of that stuff is so ingrained in the process of film, and it all, I think, for me, comes back to the approach that Charlie took with me, and how welcoming he was to me, and how kind he was to me, and feeling like that's, if I get the opportunity to collaborate again in the idea of adapting work, I want to do it in a similar way, where you treat people well, and you feel like it's fun. There shouldn't feel like a whole lot of pressure to do this or do it a certain way, but that you should, kind of going back to that original idea that I was talking about with my first book, sort of chasing the excitement of an idea and feeling like maybe there isn't this thing yet, but I'm going to try and do it my way, and that's something then. Even if it doesn't feel like it's something you're supposed to do, if it doesn't fit into a trend of the time, but for you, if it feels like it's something personal to you, then there's value in that. There's something good about that. And I would sort of always encourage people when I get a chance to talk to writers, I always feel bad that I can't offer I wish I was better at offering practical advice, but what I can say is that for them, they will offer something of themselves if they pursue it in a sincere way, and if they find their own voice, and if they tell something that for them is truthful, it will have value. And someone may read it, and it may be the right person who wants to publish it or wants to adapt it, and that to me is always kind of an exciting thought too, that you never know once you kind of work on something and put it out, sort of what can happen or where it can kind of end up. So that's how I have felt, and I've kind of felt lucky for that. And in my mind now, I keep those ideas about kind of relationships and people, and the rest of it, I try not to think about how work is received, or what a publisher thinks, or all that sort of feels out of my control. And if I think too much about that, then I start to worry. and that's not good. So I tend to just try and think about, you know, interacting with people in a sincere way and finding those like-minded people who want to pursue those things in a similar way, and then you kind of let the rest take care of itself. So yeah, maybe we can have some questions now, or, you know, maybe I'll come back over. Yeah, okay. Oh, thank you.
For the first question, on the note of collaboration, conversation, I wanted to take a quote from your book. It was Jake, one of the central characters, gives 2 points to be a good conversationalist. The first, keep simple things simple and complex things complex. The second, don't enter any conversation with a strategy or solution. And I was curious because, you know, yesterday I was penning all these questions, preparing, keeping simple things complex and complex things simple. And I was curious because so much of, you know, what makes reading so much fun is I think the collaboration between the reader and the writer. And one thing I noticed just reading through is the language allows, it's simple, right? In that it's grounded, and you know you're on a farm and you know that someone's dying or someone's in danger. But it's not so specific that you can't imagine it, but it's almost left to you. And I'm curious, how does that affect the way you read and write?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. That's a great question, and I think it really affected, in this case, this book, through the drafting process of the writing, and that's, again, something that I've really come to rely on when I write, both novels or film, is the idea that, you know, a first draft is almost more like an outline for me. It's almost more like to try and discover the story, the basic bones of the story. And because I don't write outlines at all. I never plan out a story. I don't want to know much about it at all. I just want to feel something about an idea. And so in the case of I'm Thinking of Many Things, I had this idea for the character of Jake and what he was doing. And that was going to his parents' farm with his girlfriend, this girlfriend that he was kind of thinking about, and she was going to be in the state of kind of a very specific point in a relationship that if anyone who's been in a relationship where you've kind of been in that relationship for enough time to know that person quite well, but there's still a lot you don't know, and also a particular point where maybe you're thinking about ending it, you're thinking about breaking up maybe. You're not sure because they haven't done anything really bad, but you're just sort of like, you feel maybe this relationship has run its course, and there were so many questions at that point in a relationship, so much uncertainty. And that felt like a really interesting point to enter into this story. So I knew that was the point I wanted to enter. And then I just started to write. And so it was in the course of multiple drafts, like the first few drafts, there was so much actually just like biochemistry in it. I'd spent time in a lab to do this, and again, throughout, as I was editing, I realized, like, I can't have this in here. It's not fun for people to read all of this biochemistry stuff, even though the character was a biochemist. And so for me, it was relevant for him and the story, but I was finding the story. And another thing I was doing in the drafting process, and really 8, 9, 10 drafts, was realizing for this particular book, I wanted the dialogue between the two people to be relevant as a dialogue between two people at this state of a relationship, but I also wanted it to be relevant if you read the book as just in someone's internal dialogue. And I wanted every sentence to work basically that you could read it in one way or the other. Now, most people, when they pick up the book, they're reading it only in the context of a relationship because that's what you think it is. But you can also pick it up and read it as if it's one person thinking about these things. And that to me was really interesting. And that's why the quotation that you mentioned too, the idea about like keeping simple things simple, and that to me, if you're a certain type of person like I am, you can kind of, your thoughts can almost sometimes run away into these areas that are almost like snowball, and sometimes you will, you'll tell yourself, don't make, if this is not that complex, don't make it more complex, and so there are certain, I think, lines throughout, especially in the first third of the book, that really you could take it and put it in the context of two people dating, or you could put it in this sort of more, I guess, theoretical context, and that I think was really enjoyable as a writer to think about trying to write a story that worked in almost two different ways. Again, in some ways it's sort of silly in a way, I think, because a lot of people won't come to it for that. But the hope is the other part of the thing I did in the drafting process was like remove a whole lot of the original few drafts were much longer, almost double the length. And I realized that to do it the way I wanted, I really had to make it quite short, and that people could finish it and almost start it again right away and read it in a totally different way. And they're not going to do that if the book is 300 or 400 pages probably, but if it's only 200 pages, they might, or they may reread it at a different point. And I always hoped that if they did, it would be a completely different book, So that kind of came about a lot in the drafting.
I would love to know about how, when you write now, having had your content adapted for the screen, has that impacted your writing process at all? Because you talked about how writing is much more solitary, whereas it's more collaborative, especially when you adapt. But there are still collaborative elements, as you say, thinking about your readers when they will pick up the book. How has that informed your writing process, if at all?
It has, I think, and even in a way indirectly. So I think it has affected it, not so much that I've even consciously said, okay, but what I have noticed is that the act of writing screenplays, which I've been doing now, and I didn't write screenplays at all when I was first writing novels, and as I said, I loved watching films, but I never went to film school, and I never really learned the proper way to write a screenplay. But I just started to do it when I got the opportunity. That was sort of how I learned. And so I don't know if I'm doing it in a right way, but for me, it feels like the kind of film I want to watch. That's sort of, and I would encourage anybody who writes, like that's almost, to me, there's an intuitive way to write a novel or a screenplay, I think, which is like, what do I want to read and what do I want to see? And that's how I've tried to do it. And one way that it has kind of, I guess, in a way infiltrated my novel writing would be that things like, as I was saying, the kind of limitations of a screenplay, like length, or you can't, sometimes in a novel you might, like I said, it was way longer the first time, and now I kind of realize, oh wow, I may like this writing that I'm writing in this novel, but does it really have to be there? So in some ways, I'm a more careful editor of my own work now that I've written screenplays, where I know I can't write the scene for 10 pages of the screenplay because that's a tenth of the whole screenplay, and not a whole lot has really been offered to the reader here, and so that has now, in a good way, I think, I've brought that to my novel writing, that I'm a little harsher with myself and stricter, or even, again, like I've cut things from my books, as I'm sure everybody here who writes has, that you like. The writing seems to be fairly interesting, but if it's not, in my mind, very important for that particular story, then it's best to take it out. Because, as I say, I think I am asking readers in a way to do a lot, because there is stuff to think about, and I want them to be included in this story in the way that I'm writing it, that they're part of it. And so then I want to make it as easy on them as possible. And so by like deletion and removal of excess, then I feel like that's in some ways making it easier for them. So, and one other kind of, I guess, practical example would be just like dialogue writing. I found, as I've written some more screenplays, the dialogue writing in a screenplay is so important. Yes, there are lines of description in every screenplay, but really what people, and especially actors who are the main people who you want as a screenwriter to like be drawn to something, is what they're going to be saying in the film, and their dialogue has to be really interesting and authentic to each character and specific for those characters. And again, I think that's very good for novel writers too, to feel that way about being focused on dialogue when they're going to use dialogue in a novel, to really try and do it in a way that feels true to the characters and interesting for readers.
It's quite interesting because when you're talking about, editing your own work, there's also, the addition of new elements. And one of the fascinating features of I'm thinking of ending things, the novel, is there's a sort of conversation between two people on a phone who could be policemen, who could be private investigators, who could just be people watching the news. And you get a sense that this novel is rapidly accelerating towards this event that they're talking about. But in the book, or rather than the film, it doesn't hinge on that sort of, it hinges on a similar time leap back and forth, but there's a shot of an elderly janitor, and you're meant to put the pieces together. So I'm kind of curious, and especially the addition of that poem, Bone Dog.
Yeah.
right?
I love that. Yeah.
So I was curious, how did those two different, how do you mold things to fit different mediums? And especially, I don't know, the poem, I read the book and then.
Yeah, well, and the poem,
Yeah.
Charlie put that in, and the thing
Yeah.
is, I remember him first talking about that and saying, and again, I think about Netflix and I think today even, the movie came out in 2022, I guess. No, 2020, sorry, right during COVID. And so it was shot, I guess, in 2018 in that range. And even now today, I feel like Netflix would have a harder time saying yes to like a whole poem being in a movie like that. It's really, I appreciate that they were up for that. And they were up for it really because of Charlie and his pedigree as a director. But again, I really appreciate his vision to do that and the boldness, because that poem was not in the book, but he actually had met the poet. And he really liked that poem and he felt like it was relevant. And to me, I can absolutely see why. And because when he first had that idea, I think, again, most directors and most certainly producers would say, oh, just put a little clip of that in. Put a small bit. But he was like, no, I want the whole poem in there. And I'm going to put the whole poem in there. And it was I don't know if he would say the same thing, but I feel like that's a bold decision. And I loved it. I thought it was, and I feel so much of that. I feel that feeling so much when I see the film, and I think the way that he made the film, and there are so many differences, and yet so many similarities to the book, and I love it. And I think it's so, some people will ask that to me, like, oh, is it weird for you to see a film based on your book if it's different, if there are differences? And I always say, no, it's amazing. I want that. To me, if I'm going to be the person involved in writing a screenplay on my own or not, I think once you agree to that process, once you say, yes, this can get adapted, then you have to be open to any possibility, anything happening. And the thing is, it's not the same. It is different. It's inherently different. It's a film. And so to me, the idea that you would just keep it the same and film it seems silly and a waste. This is a whole new opportunity to explore that same story and those same characters in a whole new medium. And I feel like in both of the examples of mine that are out in the world now, and I'm thinking of things and Foe, it's true. That's true in the case that they're both different. They both stand alone as films, and I'm so appreciative of that. I feel like I wouldn't want to have a work of mine that's in the realm of a novel just be the exact same if it was kind of exploring, even if if you could somehow say, I don't know if this has ever happened, but have a concept album released of a novel as a musical form. Like, it would be different because it's music, someone would write music, and that would be so interesting to hear. And it's, although a film is still a narrative story, it's a whole new thing, and it should be different, and I think the poem, and I'm Thinking of Endings, is such a great example of that. It was not in the novel, and yet to me, it has such a great place in the film, and it's something I think a lot of people who I've talked to have kind of recognized as something that for them sticks with them. And I think exactly because it is so unexpected and unusual in today, to see something like that in an American film is quite distinct, and it's unique, and for that reason I kind of love it.
Awesome.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about the kind of different variations that your work can take on as it becomes a film, and how it can evolve and change. But can you tell us also about what it's like to be involved in that process yourself? So when it comes to writing the screenplay, what sort of conversations are had, and what sort of mindset are you in?
Yeah, well, I think really and I still feel this way, is that, and I kind of alluded to that I don't really feel like I am a screenwriter in a way, and so I think I would have problems if I tried to become a screenwriter for a particular project, and I think so. What I try and do is just offer what I feel like I can, and that's going to be to try and present a story. And in this case, if I'm adapting, say, my novel Foe, I'm going to try and write that in the screenplay in the way that seems most interesting for me, and also that is kind of worthy of a cinematic adaptation, that's offering something to actors, and that's offering something to these other collaborators that I mentioned, and not just taking this novel and like converting it into final draft and making it look like a screenplay. That's not what or again, writing, and there's nothing wrong with this. Like, of course, it's in fact good, but there's people, again, who kind of know how to write a screenplay, or you have to have rising action here, and I don't know any of that, and so, but I do feel like I can just offer the things that interest me, and there may be parts of a novel that I feel like I really like, and so maybe I'll explore that a little more, or maybe I'll explore it in a different way. And then I think that's just sort of the practical aspect of the actual writing. But again, I think then the other side of it is being open and not precious or protective when you're starting to collaborate with the other artists. So the director, maybe there's a co-writer. In the case of the things I've written, even the stuff I'm doing now in that realm, it's co-writing. So I'm working with people, and I love that. That's really interesting. It's like any relationship. You have to listen, and you have to be open to what they're saying, and if sometimes it's critical, sometimes it's not. And I think, like any working relationships, you have to be able to go through that. And so I think a big part of adapting a novel into a screenplay is the relationships and finding the people who you are going to feel comfortable, like anybody here, who if you're working, or the people who you feel comfortable that you can talk to about, you can ask questions, you can say, I'm not sure about this, or sometimes you can say, no, I'm really sure about this, I really think we need this, and that you can do that with each other. And again, I feel very fortunate that in all my experiences so far, I felt that I felt both, it's we're supportive of each other, that you're listening to what the other people are saying, you're listening to feedback, and then it really does just become excitement. It becomes really, you kind of want the best for the people you're working with because you like them, and you know that they're bringing something that you don't have. They're making that piece that you're working on better because of it. And I've really felt that so many times, and I felt it through, again, actors who are devoting time and effort to bringing a character to life and doing something, making a choice that I wouldn't have thought to do, but wow, that's amazing that they did that. And I see that character in a totally different way now, because an actor has made a choice on how to portray them. Or a musician has said, I'm gonna write this piece of music based on this scene. And I get to listen to that music, and it's that to me, it means so much to think someone who is talented in that way has created this new thing that didn't exist before. And that is why I do it. That's why I love doing it, and it feels so fortunate to get the chance,
Awesome. I think we have time for maybe two more questions between us.
One thing I would love to ask, and it's sort of something a bit quicker.
Yeah.
What are your favourite book-to-screen adaptations personally?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, two that come to mind. One would be adaptation. So that's Charlie's, that where he adapted the Susan Orlean nonfiction book, and he was hired to do that. The Orchid Thief was the name of the book, and he had a real difficult time doing that because it's, again, sort of like what I was saying with mine. It doesn't yell cinematic adaptation, and so, but he'd already been hired to do it, and so he was really struggling, and so he ended up kind of writing himself into the story, and he created this whole basically interesting metaphor on adaptation, and it was such a brilliantly done film, and I remember seeing it for the first time and loving it, and so that one has always been in my mind. And the other one that comes to mind, The Shining would be another one, which I love, and Under the Skin is another one, because to me,
So scary.
it's very scary and unsettling and beautifully done, but it's so different than the novel, and so I love the novel as well. But there's just, to me, they stand alone. They're two pieces, and they both, I feel like, kind of exist in conversation, but they warrant their own medium, and so I think that is for me, it's always the most kind of interesting to see an adaptation where I love a book, and I don't feel like I've changed based on seeing the film, that it feels, and The Shining is like that too, actually. They're so different, and in that case, I think Stephen King, who wrote the novel, didn't really like the adaptation. So that would be an interesting feeling. But I kind of prefer the film in that case. So it really depends. But those are probably three of the ones that I think about, off the top of my head.
Awesome. I think last question, because you're talking about Under the Skin, and one of the most terrifying things about the movie is the score. The
Yes.
whole sound in a horror movie.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, because you're interested in music, how does sound, do you think, play?
Oh yeah,
important role in the film?
it's and not only in the film. I think but even in the writing for me.
Yeah.
And when and I don't necessarily do it as much when I'm writing novels, but when I am working on a screenplay, for whatever reason, I have kind of taken to listening to music, and I often listen to various film scores, Under the Skin being one that I've listened to probably 150 times.
Yeah.
And there's something that, for me, transports me to a certain feeling when I'm working. And so if I'm trying to write something, I don't really want to read another screenplay. I've probably only read 5 screenplays in my life, but I've listened to so many film scores and soundtracks that, for me, I feel like I draw inspiration so much from music, almost more than the actual. Because I think too, I don't like to necessarily read screenplays because I don't want to feel like I'm going to then be influenced by it. I want to try and do something else. But the music and is always kind of there. It's always part of it for me.
Amazing. Right, I will come around now with this handy dandy microphone for anyone that has any questions. So hands up, amazing.
It's glowing red, so I assume it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for coming. I'm a fellow Canadian, also went to Queen's for undergrad.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
Nice.
It's nice to see you here. My question is around your relationship with inspiration in your creative process.
Yeah.
So I know the writer Elizabeth Gilbert kind of talks about inspiration as something having a shelf life. Like when an idea strikes her, she has to have this urgency to write, or it leaves her, and then she doesn't have that same when she writes things.
Yeah.
How is that for you? Do you kind of meander with ideas, let it marinate, or do you have this urgency?
That's a really articulate way to say it, and I do relate to that. I think ideas feel like they kind of come out of nowhere, and I mean I've had them even while I've been visiting here. I've had a couple ideas come to me, and for me, I do have to get them down right away. I have to write them down because they do leave. Now the development of those ideas, so taking an idea from just the idea form into something a little more, is where kind of work enters into it, and that does take time. That, to me, sometimes I do need to go away from it, But the ideas, they don't come from thought or reflection. They come from inspiration. They come out of nowhere, and there's almost nothing more exciting, in the process, the whole process of completing a novel or something, than that initial idea when it comes. And it again, it's so personal because no one else even. You feel it, or it comes into your head, or you get a vision for something, and those sometimes they come at night. You wake up, and I will often have those moments where I'm wrestling with myself, do I get up and turn the light on and wake myself up for this idea? Is it good enough for that? And sometimes I'm like, no, it's not good enough. And then in the morning, I'm so mad at myself. I'm like, I can't remember it, but I'm sure it was good enough. It was worth it. And then sometimes I do get up and I write it down. In the morning, I'm so mad at myself. I'm like, that is the dumbest idea. Why did I get out of bed? So it does come out of nowhere.
Hi. I was just wondering for you what the relationship between your ideas and themes are and the settings that you choose for your books and the screenplays. Because, of course, I'm sure a lot of it is influenced by your upbringing in rural Canada.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering how instrumental you think it is. Do you think you could transplant these characters into the middle of New York City, or do you think that would completely change the narrative?
Great question. Yeah. No. And without really, I've never really sort of intellectually thought about that at the beginning of something. It just sort of, again, it seems like I just follow. It sounds probably flaky, but I sort of just follow what I feel like is happening, or what feels true to this story. And I think you're right. I don't think it would be the same if I put the same, say, plot and characters and put them in New York or London. Most of the stuff I write, for some reason, is not only is it isolated as far as outside of cities, but it also feels isolated. And even the more I'm writing, it's almost like I'm getting it's almost isolated to just smaller spaces, cars or rooms, I don't really know why. I'm not sure why that is, and why part of me thinks it's because what I'm most interested in is not any kind of plot, but the ideas of what's happening and what the characters are thinking about, what they're feeling, and what they're experiencing. And that's sort of what I'm trying to get at. And so it's almost, I think, the other aspects of it that's a lot of people maybe when they're writing they focus more on, that is for me almost, it's almost beyond secondary even. So in some ways, it's almost you could you could view it as either being like very important because you couldn't put it somewhere else, or almost not important at all. Yeah. It's almost like, in a way, the setting, I don't want it to intrude on, and I'm not even sure if that's true, but part of me thinks that might be part of it, is that one, it is what I'm used to because I grew up on a farm and I grew up in a rural setting, and I think I'm most comfortable. I wouldn't feel comfortable writing necessarily a novel set in New York because I've only been a visitor there. Whereas I do know what it's like to grow up on a farm, and I know what it's like to live in the country, and so I think that's the other aspect of it, is just the kind of comfort level of setting things there feels natural for me.
Thank you so much. This is more of a basic question, but I'd love to hear you talk about how you developed your craft as a writer, and in connection with the confidence with which you speak about your craft. I'm thinking about this especially because you mentioned doing an undergraduate degree in philosophy, which is such an academic subject.
Mm-hmm.
And I just finished a DPhil in ancient philosophy, and I'm now working on turning my thesis into a novel as well as into an academic monograph.
Congrats.
But it's so difficult to go from academic writing back to the creative writing of my childhood, and I find I have no confidence in it anymore. Yeah. And while it's really beautiful to hear you and other authors speak about things like, following what you feel like needs to be done and having that kind of integrity, and that's something that resonates and rings true. Yeah. I feel a lot of desperation between the starting point of being habituated to an academic feedback loop. Yeah. And lacking that early encouragement that you mentioned.
For sure.
And also not having been trained in any sort of creative writing. So,
but all those things I think that you've said to me are all good things. Those are all things that I, in my mind, that I can relate to and that I feel like are all actually positives. The fact that you don't have any training in creative writing, I think, is good. It's better in a lot of ways than if you have too much training. And I mean, that's good too. I just mean it more that that shouldn't be a drawback, because that means when you do something, it's going to be probably something that only you can do, that someone else can't do because it hasn't been. And the fact that you have the academic background you have is also really good. That gives you a particular perspective. The fact that you don't feel confident is how I feel too all the time when I'm starting something, when I'm working on something. I don't feel confident in it at all. It feels as I was saying when I first started that, I had no idea if anybody would ever want to publish it at all. And because, again, I did get that early encouragement, it was helpful for me to keep going. But I've kept that in my mind because whenever I start anything, I feel a lack of confidence. The only thing that I really do speak that in that way about feeling confident about is really, again, kind of the pursuit of relationships and trying to find people. And so that could be editors, or it could be if you're trying to find an agent, but really trying to prioritize the type of people that you feel like are good people that you'll collaborate with, and that to me is so important, because it's a vulnerable position to be in when you're doing anything creative. There are feelings of inadequacy, or sometimes feelings of why is anybody going to listen to what I'm saying? It's not important. Like, I think if you kind of start to feel like the opposite of that, it's probably not a good sign. Because to me, there always are those feelings, and they are sometimes helpful, And I think then the last part of it is really, as again, silly as it sounds, to really to chase the things that feel exciting to you. So even if you're not sure about it, or if it feels like, I don't know what others will think about this, if you feel excited about just even the idea, it's worth following for a bit. And that's, to this day, how I make decisions on what I'm going to work on is am I excited by this? Does it feel? And I never try to make decisions on, do I think someone else would like this, or do I think a publisher will like this, or if I think that way, it's not going to go well. But if I'm excited, then I know I can do something.
I feel like that's a really important thing, the ideas that make a book, not just the form.
Yeah.
Because so much today, there are almost more books on writing than books that are written today. And I think, one of the most exciting things is you don't know where ideas come from, or if you do, you can really follow them to these rabbit holes and Alice in Wonderland places that you have no idea how you're going to come out on the other side.
Yes.
And I definitely think, you know, I'm 26 now, I've been writing since I'm like 16, but it's only been in the past few years I've been able to say the voices and the stories I like, because I'm not putting this barrier on what can be written or can't be written. I'm writing what I actually like.
Yes.
And usually there's a narrative that emerges there, you know, something
Exactly.
like in a musical score, you know, there's a certain sound wave you're going to follow to the end, or a movie, and, you know, there's so many ways that, you know, it's better to be creative and open to the opportunities rather than the limit and say, no, it needs to be this one thing
Yes.
that's going to happen, and if it's not, it's going to burst down in flames. I mean, truthfully, the great thing I think about opening a book is you have no idea where it's going to take you in your head before you turn to the last page. And one of my favorite things about your book says maybe you'll get a better idea if you flip back to the beginning, because that's where the beginning is the ending, and I love that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and you're right. I agree with all of that. And that not only when you pick up a book to read it, but also I think that same mentality can approach to when you sit down to write something. You don't know where it's going to go. So you don't have to sort of confine yourself to say, I have this idea, but geez, the only way I think it's going to end is maybe for this to happen. That's not, just don't think about that yet. Just if you have this idea and there's something in it that feels to you worthwhile, like you have no idea where it's going to go. If you take some time to kind of live in that space for a bit, it may take you somewhere that's completely unexpected, you know.
Thank you. Thanks for your talk today. There's so much that I feel like I've been able to relate to, and I've really enjoyed the discussion. I wanted to ask a little bit more about your writing process. And so owing to the quote that Griffin read out before about keeping simple things simple and complex ideas complex, I also studied philosophy here.
Cool.
And I'm just amazed at how when I get into an idea for the first time, I'm just sort of taken aback by how complex something can be.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll put it down for a few years, pick it back up, and it's even more complex.
Yes.
And, you know, I can sort of find myself in it, read commentators' thoughts about that first idea, and it's really just layers upon layers.
Yes.
So there's that tension on one end. And then on the other end, there's a sort of, you know, wanting to write more simply for especially, what is this phenomenon of double screen viewing? So.
Oh, God, yeah.
So for viewers who aren't even really paying attention.
I know.
And so you're pulled by these two different tensions, and how does that affect the way that you write?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And no wonder there's such a good vibe here. All these philosophers here. It's like, it's great. But I mean, think about that too. It goes the other way. I remember thinking sometimes when I was in philosophy classes and thinking, someone would say, like, get up and say something, maybe another student, and then it sounded really complex. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, that's actually kind of a simple idea. Why are you making it sound so complex? So that's, you know, the other, I think, side of it too is sometimes to like, the most complex things can kind of like, or the most simple things, you don't need to try and overcomplicate it by making it complex, you know. And yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, I try not to think about a lot of things when I'm working, but what the point you brought up about, because this is, I mean, it is a real thing that, I've actually heard this before in like meetings about, you know, people may be folding the laundry, but what they mean is they're on their phone when this is going to be on a screen. And to me, if I was ever sort of ushered into that to do that, I would just do something else. Like so that's fine. Like if that's what becomes of, you know, writing, say, films or television, then that's cool. But for me, I would have a hard time, like, you know, with that, just because I don't want to, like, that's what AI is going to do that, right? AI will write those. And so there will be a market for that. But there's a lot of stuff that AI will never be able to do in terms of writing, I think. That's my belief. And those are the things that, for me, are the most interesting. And again, it probably comes back to being first and foremost, a reader of novels and growing up loving reading. And that, to me, you have to focus. You have to be sitting quietly for the most part, not talking, not distracted. I do anyway. And when you do that, the rewards are huge. There's this huge amount of pleasure that comes with it that is, you can't get doing anything else. Not even watching films for me. There's nothing like sitting, reading, and imagining everything. And I find myself now having to be much more diligent. My reading has changed since, in the last 10 years since I've, or however long since I've had a phone, that I find myself, like I'll finish a chapter and then I find I'm like picking up my phone and like refreshing my email. I'm like, why? I don't need to check my email right now. It doesn't make sense, but I'm doing it so I do think even people who love reading, and we have to like actively combat the evil that is the phone that's sitting right there that offers this other type of thing that really is often not in any way engaging, but it's so easily to distract you from something that actually will make you feel better and make you feel more engaged as a human, and make you connected. And so it is a really interesting time right now, I think, and to be working in the realm of writing and stuff, and kind of like what I was saying before about, I think I can really only think about the things that maybe I will try and offer the things that I can, and if someone else finds something good in that, that's great, I hope so, and if not, then I'll have to do something else, and I'm also kind of like okay with that reality. Someday maybe what I'm trying to do no one else would want to engage with, so then so be it.
Hi, I think you've gathered a lot of Canadians here because I'm also from Ontario.
Oh, you are? Wow,
Yeah.
okay, great.
And so I'm not philosophy, I'm an English student. So I'm curious, we have in Ontario especially this kind of really rich Gothic history with like Margaret Atwood, Alice Munro.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, you did mention your dad was an English prof. So did you keep that tradition at all in your mind when you're writing? Because that was a lot of my reading. Was
interesting.
This isolation and a lot of fear of wilderness and all of these
That's
things.
so cool to hear, actually. I've never really, I read all that, so it's all in my mind, but it's funny because Sarah, who's here, who's my partner, she has mentioned that to me before. She has seen that in my work, and that there is some kind of, that it aligns with some sort of like Ontario Gothic. And it's interesting to me. I have never I've never really seen it, and maybe just because it's stuff I'm doing, but when she explained it to me, I was like, that does make sense actually. Like, I guess I do fit in because, and I think because that is where I'm from, I'm part of that. Just like they were writing about the area that they knew and the characters that they came across, and so I think while the content and the sort of form is so different, there are those overlapping similarities that in some ways feel kind of nice. It feels, nice to be part of a group like that, even though we're writing in years apart and writing about different things. It is kind of nice to feel like there are these links that kind of join the works. I do like that idea.
Hi, thank you for being here. It's funny, I listen to the Faux soundtrack often while I write, and so it was fun.
Oh,
to
thank you. I'm such a fan of the soundtrack. Those musicians are all so brilliant, and they're from all over the 3 different places in the world, and they came together to make this music that is, to me, unlike anything else. And so I always try and promote that music. So thank you for listening to it. And it really is, I think, excellent music to have on if you're working or reading or anything like that. So
yeah. Well, my question is not about music. You talked a bit about the years of waiting around kind of the film in particular.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for both of the films.
Yes.
You also mentioned kind of submitting short stories in the process of dealing with, rejection or kind of waiting in that process as well.
Yeah.
One thing that it's interesting to me is that despite the urgency around ideas in writing, waiting is also a very central part of the process.
That's a great point.
And I'm curious how you approach or have dealt with that as a part of process. I think that I often hear writers talk about writing for the sake of writing versus writing for an audience within that conversation.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine that in adapting novels to screenplays, the presence of or the idea of an audience as who you're working towards is much more present or kind of front of mind. And so I'm curious how you've dealt with that.
Yeah.
The presence of waiting and ambiguity there.
Thank you. That's a really good point. I should have probably thought to bring that up because it is so prevalent, and it's almost, I think about it in kind of 2 ways. One, there's like the waiting if you're working on something, you know, and it's sort of you can feel impatient. I want to get this either like finished, or I want to get it out in the world, or I want to get people reacting to it. And that, I think, is not the right way to think. I think it really is helpful to be patient and to not try and rush through it. Because on the other side is that a lot of the times work that I've done, I've finished it and I thought, okay, I want to get this out now. I wish either a short story, I wish I wanted to publish this, and it doesn't happen. And then I return to it, say like 4 months later or a year later, and I'm like, oh God, I don't like this. I'm so glad this is not out in the world. Like I feel appreciative that it didn't happen, and yet I was so impatient for it to happen. That's why I think it's a really great point you bring up, because when I've talked to students at universities who are writing students, a lot of them really are anxious to get their first thing published. And I completely understand it, and I still feel that too. And when you're working on something, like I said at the very beginning, it feels complete when someone reads it. So no wonder you feel impatient to get it done, because you want it to feel complete and you want people to react to it. And yet the idea of waiting and time in the creative process is extremely valuable. It's so helpful. And it's so helpful as an arbiter and as an editor when you wait and you have a little bit of distance with time and you see things differently and you change it. And so for me now, the idea of waiting is just integral to when I'm working on something. I'll finish a draft or something and then I just won't look at it for a while, no matter what I feel, good or bad, because I know now not to really think about it or judge it too much, but actually to put it away. And then ideally think about something else creatively, think about another. And the last number of years, I always now have multiple projects that I'm trying to work on for that reason. So I'm not just going nuts, you know, thinking about something or trying to wait for that time to go by so I can look at it again. But always, and this has continued to be the case since I've been doing this, whenever I go back to something, I always want to change it. I always want to change it. Sometimes I want to add things, sometimes I want to take it away. So if I was told now that I had to put something out instantly when I was finished, it would be mortifying. And so I always try and encourage students to say, like, be patient with it, really be patient. And it's not bad to be pursuing things or sending it to people for feedback, or that's all good, but don't feel pressure or the impatience to get it out in the world. And because once it is, then the concrete's been poured and it's out there, that it's done. But enjoy the process of holding on to it as long as you can and being with it, and because it's still in that way freeing, because you can still alter it, you can still tweak it, and that's a good spot to be in.
I have a question, if I can. I would love to know, on a day-to-day writing for you, what does that look like? What's your routine?
I do. Yeah. I'm pretty like routine. Like some people, for me, routine is very helpful just day to day, but particularly in writing. I would say I don't adhere to any, like, I remember when I first wrote my first book, I think, and because before that, like, I wasn't really, I guess people didn't really know I was writing, and so when like friends and family realized that I was like writing, they would start to like send me, they'd be like, The Guardian released like 10 rules of writing, and they'd like email it to me. I'm like, okay, and I would always read them, and I'd be like, that's, to me, no, like, and it just kind of underscores the idea that there are no rules. Like, so to me, some people say you should write every day if you're a writer, and maybe, like, if that works for you, you should, but I don't, you know. Some days, there are some moments, like some months, say if I'm working something, I do write every day. I might write a lot every day. But the one routine that I kind of do hold true is that for a chunk of time in the morning, I do try and write, and depending on what I have on the go. And then because of where I live, it actually is convenient. I kind of break up I stop to go play basketball at the university, Queens actually. So there's like a game of like pickup basketball, and so I go and play that, and in that time I'm like not thinking about what I'm working on, and so that's very helpful. And then I come up, and then usually in the afternoon, I will pick back up for a little bit of what I've been writing on, or I'll revise what I've written. And then sometimes, again, if it's like, if I have a deadline or something, then in the evenings after dinner, I'll go back to it. And so I'll have those 3 distinct chunks of writing time. But again, sometimes if I'm starting something new, and if I don't have a deadline for it, I usually, it's a harder part of the process, and so I won't force myself to go back. I'll occupy myself with something else in the afternoon and evening. But that morning time usually for me is devoted to like creative writing, creative work. And that's when I feel like I'm at my most kind of like caffeinated and productive, you know.
Caffeine really helps.
It does. No, I mean, it's beautiful, and especially I think anything creative. It does make you feel.
What's your go-to coffee?
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot here. It's kind of embarrassing in a way because it's just like a classic like North American drip coffee. And I think just because I'm used to that, and so like when I was collaborating with this guy Garth from Australia, he would always make fun of me because he would come to Canada. He's like your coffee's awful, and he's like, let me get you a nice flat white, and I was like, it's fine, but it's not hot and it's so flat. Small, and yeah, I'm like, for me it's I understand, but I just want like a nice mug of like hot drip coffee. But I mean, I can appreciate all types, but that's sort of. What about you? Are you more of a cappuccino, like espresso?
I do have the AeroPress. The Oxford Writers House does not sponsor them, but if we could, we definitely. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Just bang.
Yeah.
Really have this. You can be quite creative. Get beans from everywhere.
I do like that, and I like grinding beans first. But the other thing about like a pot, it stays hot.
Yeah.
Which I really like, so I can like I like it really hot, so I find if it's getting cooled down a bit, I can like top it up, and it's definitely part of like again the routine for me.
Yeah.
Making coffee in the morning is nice to kind of have that routine of like hearing it, and I find sometimes if different modes of it, you don't kind of get that part of it. It's almost too fast. It happens too fast. So.
I think it's kind of one of the last questions. I'm very curious because we're most of us here are definitely at an emerging point in writing where you may not always have the time. So I'm curious, how do you manage to find a routine amidst, amidst being daily? Is it kind of whenever you can get the time? Because I think one of the biggest things, at least when I have coffee and I put on a soundtrack, like Minari is my favorite soundtrack.
Yeah.
I love that soundtrack.
Brilliant.
It's almost as if you create this little sphere, this bubble where you can just feel safe and you're not constantly thinking about everything going on. And I'm curious, how can you carry that routine to new places when you're trying new jobs and you're not necessarily sure where your career is going to go? Yeah,
that is tricky. And I remember I had a lot of years when I was first writing when it was not my job, and so I was working, and I was finding time. But what I found was actually it kind of the routine then to return to the writing I was doing, which again at that point mostly was like short fiction, is I found it would happen naturally, because I loved it, and I was so drawn to it. I was so, and I found that the times when I was not working, I would go to a cafe, or I would, and it was sort of, these routines would almost establish themselves. It wasn't like I had to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do it on Saturday morning, or I would just find, okay, I'm not working today, and then I would find myself either in my apartment or going to a library or a cafe somewhere. And it always seemed at that point, especially like now I often write from home and stuff, but then there was something exciting being out in public, and not like no one knew what I was doing, but there was an energy and some kind of, it didn't feel quite so maybe harsh or hard to be coming up with these if you're just sitting quietly in your room. Whereas if you're out and there's other people coming and going, you can kind of distract yourself for a moment by watching this or that, and then get back to the story. And so I was in Toronto for a number of years, and I was working these two jobs when I was, and I would just find myself on a lot of the downtime writing. And so it came in that way. It felt easy because I wasn't, no one was publishing anything, but I was getting something from it.
Yeah.
And so in that way, you're right that it's harder because the routine changes depending on the time, but it's also, I think it's nice in a way if it feels like you end up, like how water expands into space. It's almost like it'll find the time that is there, even if it's only an hour or two at this point. You'll kind of find it when the time is right and when you have the right project.
Do we have any last questions? If not, all right. Everyone, could we please give a round of applause for Iain?
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Wow. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate all the great